The first encounter. Isaac's heart pounded in his chest as the tension between him and the flight attendant thickened. His thoughts were racing, unsure of how this was even happening. How had a simple wish for a bit of comfort for his daughter turned into this, an argument, a confrontation in the sky? He glanced at Harper again, and his resolve hardened. She was sitting up straighter, gripping her rabbit tighter. It was a subtle gesture, but Isaac knew it meant something. She was bracing herself, trying to be brave, just as she always had been. His little girl had been through so much already, and he wasn't about to let some small-minded, cold-hearted flight attendant take away this moment from her. But as Isaac stood, prepared to defend his daughter, the voice from the front of the plane interrupted the standoff. "Is there a problem here?" The voice was firm yet calm, a contrast to the palpable tension that had built up. Isaac turned to see a man in a navy blue uniform striding down the aisle toward them. The sleeves of his jacket were unbuttoned, and he wore the epaulettes of a captain, his golden stripes glinting under the soft light of the cabin. The flight attendant's shoulders stiffened, and she immediately took a step back. Isaac was taken aback. The pilot himself? Was this really happening? Was the captain going to side with her or with him? The flight attendant hesitated, clearly thrown off by the sudden appearance of the captain. Isaac could feel the ripple of unease in the air, people in the cabin shifting, eyes darting between him, Harper, and the flight attendant, all of them waiting for the next move. It seemed as though the entire plane was holding its breath. "I was just explaining to this gentleman," the flight attendant began, but the captain raised a hand, signaling her to stop. "Let me handle this," the captain said, his voice even but authoritative. The flight attendant blinked, her expression betraying the subtle confusion and frustration she was trying to hide. She gave a sharp nod and moved back toward the galley, muttering something under her breath as she disappeared from view. Isaac stared after her, still too stunned to fully comprehend what had just occurred. Was this it? Was it over? The captain stood before him, taking a moment to assess the situation. Isaac couldn't quite read his expression. The captain was tall, his face a mixture of composure and empathy. His dark eyes softened as they met Isaac's, and for a moment, it seemed like he understood. He must have sensed Isaac's frustration, his determination to protect his daughter at all costs. The captain's gaze then shifted to Harper, sitting quietly, her hands clasped tightly around her rabbit. She was looking up at the captain with wide, curious eyes. Isaac's heart twisted at how small and fragile she seemed in that moment. She didn't deserve any of this. She had enough to fight without having to face this kind of ignorance. Isaac had worked so hard to shield her from the harsh realities of the world, and now, here it was, something he couldn't protect her from. The captain knelt down to her level, offering her a warm, reassuring smile. "Hey there, young lady," he said, his voice soft but clear. "Are you okay?" Harper nodded slowly, but her eyes flicked back to Isaac for reassurance. Isaac could see the uncertainty in her gaze. She was used to being strong, but sometimes, even the strongest little hearts needed their fathers to help them hold on. "I'm okay, sir," Harper said, her voice barely above a whisper. She spoke with an innocence that broke Isaac's heart all over again. She was so young, too young to face these kinds of challenges, but she faced them with more bravery than most adults. The captain smiled at her, and then his gaze turned back to Isaac. "I've been flying for over 20 years, and I've never seen something like this happen," he said quietly, his tone still calm. "First class is for everyone who's paid for it, regardless of their circumstances. Your daughter is welcome here, and if anyone tells you differently, you come to me." Isaac felt the weight on his chest begin to lift, but only slightly. There was still a tightness, an undercurrent of unease, that refused to fade. This wasn't over, not by a long shot. Isaac's voice, when he finally spoke, was thick with emotion. "Thank you. Thank you for understanding." The captain nodded, standing back up. "I'll make sure this doesn't happen again." "Rest assured, sir. With that, the captain turned and walked toward the front of the cabin, leaving Isaac to settle back into his seat. Harper, her curiosity piqued, asked in a soft voice, "Dad, what did he say? Is it okay now?" Isaac squeezed her hand gently. "Yes, sweetheart. It's okay now. We're fine." But despite the captain's reassurance, Isaac couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't the end of the story. He had been calm and polite, but that woman, whoever she was, had judged his daughter before even knowing her. And that judgment had been cruel, unkind, and unjust. The flight continued. For a time, the only sound in their small corner of the cabin was the quiet hum of the plane's engines and the faint chatter of other passengers. Harper finally settled into her seat, her eyes flicking between the in-flight entertainment screen and the window, watching the clouds stretch endlessly below them. She sipped her juice and toyed with her rabbit, but her expression seemed to darken slightly. Isaac knew she was still thinking about what had happened, and he wished more than anything he could take that pain away. But he also knew one thing for sure, he wasn't going to let her carry that pain alone. Not ever. As the hours passed, Isaac glanced around at the other passengers, many of whom seemed to be avoiding eye contact. Some stared at the back of their seats, others pretended to read. A few seemed to share glances with one another, their eyes flicking toward Isaac and Harper with judgment, curiosity, or perhaps sympathy. But not one person stood up for them, not one person offered a word of support. That realization stung, but Isaac refused to let it break him. Just when he thought the worst had passed, however, the flight attendant returned. This time, she approached them cautiously, almost hesitantly. She glanced at Isaac, then Harper, and then back to Isaac again, her posture stiff and defensive. Isaac braced himself for another round of hostility. But instead, the flight attendant's words were more subdued this time, lacking the condescension that had marked her previous tone. "Sir," she said quietly, I apologize for earlier. I didn't mean to upset you or your daughter." Isaac didn't answer immediately. He was too stunned by the shift in her demeanor. She continued, her voice now softer, more human. "I've seen families go through a lot on flights," she said, her eyes briefly flicking down to Harper. "And I realize I overstepped. I'm sorry." Isaac didn't know how to respond. This apology wasn't a cure for the pain caused, but it was something. It was an acknowledgement of wrongdoing, a small moment of human decency in a world that sometimes felt like it had forgotten how to care. Isaac gave her a small, tight-lipped smile. "Thank you. I appreciate that." Harper looked up at the attendant, her big brown eyes studying her for a moment before she spoke. "It's okay. I know you didn't mean to be mean." The flight attendant's face softened, and she gave a small nod before turning to walk away. Isaac sighed deeply, leaning back in his seat. Despite everything that had happened, despite the shame and the embarrassment, a small part of him felt lighter. He knew the journey wasn't over. There was still a long way to go, and the world still had its share of cruelty to offer. But in this moment, Isaac held on to the glimmer of hope that had kept him going all this time, the hope that kindness could still break through, even in the most unexpected places. And for Harper, that was enough. A father's resolve. As the hours dragged on, Isaac tried to push the discomfort of the earlier incident from his mind. The hum of the plane, the clink of the seatbelt signs, and the distant chatter of passengers served as a reminder that the world, for better or worse, was still moving around them. His focus shifted back to Harper, whose small, delicate hand was still resting in his. She had fallen quiet again, staring out the window, lost in the endless stretch of clouds beneath them. It was moments like these, when she seemed so peaceful, yet so fragile, that Isaac's heart ached the most. The life he had hoped to give her had been turned upside down the day they had received the news of her diagnosis. Harper was strong, stronger than anyone Isaac knew. But how long could a little girl fight cancer with nothing but faith and the will to keep going? Isaac pushed those dark thoughts aside, determined to focus on the present. He looked out of the window for a moment, tracing the silver lining of a cloud. They were on their way to a renowned doctor, a specialist Isaac had scrimped and saved for months to afford. The experimental treatment was her best chance at extending her life, at giving her the time she deserved. Harper had been through so much already, and Isaac wouldn't, let her lose hope now. He tried to push aside the bitterness that had formed in his chest. No amount of money could fix what Harper was facing. But maybe, just maybe, this treatment could give her a few more years, a few more summers filled with sunshine, a few more Christmases, more birthdays, more chances to chase the normal life every child deserved. And for that, Isaac was willing to fight anyone, anywhere, even if it meant standing up to people like that flight attendant who didn't seem to understand. Isaac's thoughts were interrupted when Harper shifted in her seat. She turned to face him, her big, bright eyes studying him carefully. She had a way of looking at him, almost as though she could read his mind, even when he tried to hide his emotions. "Dad," she whispered, her voice still weak but full of curiosity, "do you think I'll get better?" Isaac's chest tightened at the question. He had promised himself that he would never lie to her, not about this. He had told her that there was hope, that they were fighting, that the doctors were doing everything they could. But the truth was so much darker than he could bear to say aloud. He paused, taking a slow breath, gathering the strength to offer her something to hold on to. "Sweetheart, I believe with all my heart that you're going to fight this. You're stronger than anyone I know." Harper smiled, but it was faint, like a delicate flicker of light struggling to stay bright. She didn't respond right away, instead turning her attention back to the plush rabbit in her lap. Isaac watched her for a moment, wondering just how much his little girl understood. She had a maturity that astounded him, a wisdom he couldn't fathom, but still, she was just 9. No child should have to grapple with these kinds of thoughts. The captain's voice came over the intercom, briefly pulling Isaac from his reverie. He spoke with the calm professionalism of someone who had spent decades in the sky. "Ladies and gentlemen, we are currently flying at 30,000 feet. We will be arriving at our destination in approximately 2 hours. We hope you're enjoying your flight, and thank you for choosing our airline." Isaac knew that even though this flight was just a small part of their journey, this moment would stay with him forever. He would never forget how his heart had felt when that flight attendant had made a spectacle of them, when her words had been sharp and filled with judgment. But he also wouldn't forget how the captain had stepped in, how, in the end, the injustice had been acknowledged and, in a way, undone. The world hadn't entirely failed them today. The rest of the flight passed without incident, though Isaac couldn't shake the unease that had settled deep within him. He felt the weight of everyone's eyes, whether they were aware of it or not. The subtle glances. The whispers. The discomfort that had spread like an invisible fog through the cabin. Isaac couldn't tell if it was the flight attendant's actions or the mere fact that they were sitting in first class that made people uncomfortable. Perhaps it was a combination of both. By the time the plane began its descent, Harper had fallen asleep in her seat, her small body curled up as best as she could with the seatbelt fastened across her chest. Isaac watched her sleep for a long while, his hand still resting on hers. There was something so incredibly peaceful about the way she lay there, so trusting, so unaware of the world's harshness. If only he could keep her in that place forever, safe and untouched by the bitterness of life. But he couldn't. No one could. As the plane touched down and taxied toward the gate, Isaac felt a mix of relief and apprehension. They had arrived, but the hardest part was yet to come. They had a long road ahead of them, doctors to meet, treatments to start. There was no guarantee, no certainty, and Isaac hated that. The unpredictability of it all gnawed at him. Isaac gently shook Harper awake, smiling softly as her eyes fluttered open. "Harper, sweetheart. We're here." She yawned, rubbing her eyes as she stretched. "Are we really here? I get to see the doctor now?" Isaac nodded, trying to keep his tone upbeat, trying to hide the weight in his voice. Yes, baby. We're going to meet the best doctor. You're going to be just fine. The smile that lit up her face made Isaac's heart ache. She was so brave, so determined to believe in him, in the promise of better days ahead. He wished he could promise her that everything would work out, but the truth was too complex to simplify. All he could do was hope. Hope that the treatment would work. Hope that the doctors could work a miracle. Hope that his little girl would have more time. Time to grow. Time to laugh. Time to fight. Isaac stood and gathered their things. His eyes scanned the plane one last time, watching the other passengers as they began to unbuckle their seatbelts and prepare to deplane. Some smiled at him, some didn't look at him at all. He didn't care. He didn't need their approval, not anymore. As he guided Harper toward the exit, a voice called out to him from behind. "Excuse me, sir." Isaac turned to see the flight attendant, the same one who had been so cold earlier. She was standing at the rear of the cabin, her face now unreadable. Isaac raised an eyebrow, waiting for her to speak. "I just wanted to apologize again," she said, her voice hesitant. "I was out of line earlier. I was wrong to judge you and your daughter." Isaac didn't know what to say. A small part of him wanted to lash out, to tell her just how deeply she had hurt him, to remind her of the damage her words had caused. But then he looked at Harper, her innocent face still glowing with excitement, still hopeful despite everything that had happened. He took a slow breath. "It's all right. We all make mistakes." The flight attendant's eyes softened, and she gave a small nod of appreciation. "Thank you," she whispered. Isaac offered a tight smile before guiding Harper off the plane and into the airport terminal. As they walked through the crowded hall, Isaac felt a strange sense of peace begin to settle in his chest. The world was complicated and cruel, but there was beauty in the unexpected moments of humanity, the small acts of kindness that sometimes rose above the noise. And as they walked toward their next chapter, toward the unknowns that awaited them, Isaac knew one thing for certain: he would continue to fight for Harper, no matter the cost. He would never let her fight alone. The long road ahead. The airport terminal was bustling, alive with the hum of travelers rushing to their gates and the sounds of flight attendants calling for final boarding. Isaac kept his grip firm on Harper's hand as they navigated through the crowd. She had woken up completely now, blinking and adjusting to the new surroundings, but her excitement seemed to have returned in full force. The sleepiness from the flight was gone, replaced by the energy of a little girl who was determined to see the world on her terms, no matter how unpredictable or frightening that world might be. Isaac couldn't help but marvel at how she had handled everything, how she managed to live each day with the kind of strength most adults couldn't even fathom. For a moment, his mind wandered back to the day they'd gotten the diagnosis. It was a day he would never forget. Harper had been playing with her favorite stuffed bunny at the kitchen table when the doctor had called, her small face lighting up with the same excitement she always wore when she thought someone was about to tell her good news. Isaac had hoped, prayed, that it wouldn't be bad news. But when the words, terminal, and aggressive, came into the conversation, it felt like the ground had shifted beneath him. And yet, despite the heaviness of those words, Harper's strength was a beacon for him. She had turned toward him, her big eyes wide, and whispered, "Don't worry, Daddy. We'll fight it." Isaac couldn't stop himself from squeezing her hand a little harder as they made their way to the luggage claim area. The truth was, he didn't know what would come next. The treatments were experimental, the chances of success unclear. But for Harper, for his little girl, he would hold on to hope. She deserved every chance the world could give her, even if it meant climbing mountains for that one sliver of possibility. After retrieving their bags, they made their way out into the city's hustle. The bright lights of the streets felt a little overwhelming after the quiet confines of the plane. Isaac hailed a cab, still keeping a close eye on Harper. She had been quieter now, perhaps sensing the heaviness of the day, or maybe the weight of the upcoming treatment. Isaac could only imagine what was going on inside her small heart, but he did his best to keep his face a mask of calm and strength for her. The drive to the hospital was a blur of flashing lights, high-rise buildings, and crowds of people that seemed to be living in a world far removed from the one Isaac and Harper occupied. He couldn't remember the last time he had felt so isolated, so separate from the noise and chaos around him. The world seemed to spin in a way that was beyond his control, but at least for now, he could focus on the one thing that mattered most, Harper. As they approached the towering glass hospital, Isaac could feel his heart begin to race. The building loomed ahead, its bright lights casting long shadows across the streets. This was it. The hospital that might hold the answers they had been searching for. Isaac had read every article, every patient story he could find online, desperately hoping that this was the place where things would turn around. But even as he pulled up to the curb, he couldn't shake the fear that this could be the place where they ran out of options. "Daddy?" Harper asked, breaking the silence in the car. Isaac glanced at her through the rearview mirror, surprised by the soft, quiet tone of her voice. "Yeah, sweetheart?" "I'm scared," she whispered, her small voice so vulnerable that it pierced through the layers of Isaac's own fear. Isaac's heart skipped a beat, but he quickly masked the crack in his composure. "It's okay to be scared," he said gently, turning around to face her fully. "I'm scared too. But we're in this together. We're going to take it one step at a time, just like we always do." Harper nodded, but Isaac could see the uncertainty in her eyes. She wasn't a child anymore in many ways, she was wise beyond her years, but that didn't make her any less vulnerable. The cab driver pulled to a stop, and Isaac quickly paid the fare, his hands slightly trembling. He held the door open for Harper, and as she stepped out, she reached for his hand without hesitation. Together, they walked toward the towering entrance of the hospital. Isaac could feel the weight of every step pressing down on him, but he was determined to hold it together, for her. Inside, the hospital was sleek and modern, a far cry from the sterile, cold feeling of other places they had been. The walls were adorned with abstract art, soft colors aimed at creating a calming atmosphere, though Isaac knew from experience that no amount of decoration could alleviate the fear that gnawed at his gut. A nurse at the front desk greeted them with a warm smile, but there was something about the professionalism in her voice that made it feel too clinical, too impersonal. "Can I help you?" Isaac cleared his throat, his voice steady despite the rising panic inside. "We have an appointment with Dr. Williams. Harper Grant." The nurse typed something into the computer, nodding. "Right, yes. Dr. Williams is expecting you. Please have a seat. He'll be with you shortly." Isaac nodded and led Harper to a row of chairs. He couldn't help but notice the other families waiting in the same area. Some of them were whispering softly to each other, while others sat in quiet contemplation. The anxiety in the air was thick, a shared understanding between people who had been forced into the same club of uncertainty. Harper sat next to him, her small hands clutching her rabbit tightly. Isaac could see the fight in her, the determination to stay calm, but he also noticed the way her eyes flickered nervously as she glanced around. He wished he could protect her from all of this. The sterile smells, the cold surfaces, the constant reminder that there was something wrong with her body. But that was the hardest part of being a parent, knowing there were things you couldn't protect your child from. Time passed slowly. Isaac found himself lost in thought, his mind wandering back to the flight, to the cruel words of the flight attendant. He had been so upset then, so angry that someone could be so cruel to his daughter, to someone so innocent. But now, in the quiet, the anger had faded. It wasn't the flight attendant he had to focus on. It was Harper. She needed him. He would never let anyone make her feel small again, never again allow someone to treat her as less than what she was, a little girl full of potential and strength, someone who could move mountains with her courage. A door opened at the far end of the waiting area, and Isaac's heart skipped a beat. A doctor walked toward them, a tall man in a white coat with a friendly but serious expression. He approached Isaac and Harper with a firm handshake. "Mr. Grant, Harper." It's a pleasure to meet you both. I'm Dr. Williams. His voice was warm, yet there was an underlying urgency in his tone. I've reviewed Harper's case, and I know how much this means to you. We'll do everything we can to help. Isaac felt a flicker of hope, just a small one, but it was there. Maybe, just maybe, they were going to be okay. The reckoning. The moment Dr. Williams extended his hand toward Isaac, it felt like a fragile bridge between the fear that had clung to him for so long and the hope that had been growing, quietly, like a seed in the dark. Harper, still clutching her plush rabbit tightly, followed her father's gaze and extended her own small hand to the doctor. The contrast between the two of them, the doctor in his pristine white coat, and the tiny girl with the soft cap covering her thin hair, was stark. But in that small, brave gesture, Isaac saw his daughter's courage shine through. "Thank you for seeing us, Doctor," Isaac said, shaking the doctor's hand firmly. "Of course, Mr. Grant." "Harper, you're in good hands here," Dr. Williams said, his tone kind but efficient. "Why don't we head to my office so we can go over everything? It's a bit quieter there." Isaac nodded, and they followed the doctor down a long hallway lined with rooms. The walls here were decorated with motivational posters and calming paintings, meant to ease the nerves of parents and children alike. The hospital was trying, Isaac could see that, but nothing could erase the apprehension that settled deep in his chest. Harper walked beside him, her small hand tucked in his, and he could feel the weight of the world in that little hand. They entered a comfortable office, furnished with dark wood and soft lighting. The walls were lined with shelves filled with books, some medical, others personal. Dr. Williams invited them to sit, and Isaac helped Harper into one of the chairs, her rabbit now resting on her lap. He took the seat next to her, careful not to let her feel the tension in his body. Dr. Williams took a seat behind his desk, opening a file in front of him. "I've reviewed Harper's medical history, and we've discussed the experimental treatment options. I know this is a lot to digest, but we're confident this is the best path forward for her condition." Isaac listened carefully, his mind racing as the doctor explained the details. The treatment was risky, the chances of success uncertain, but it was a sliver of hope in a world where hope had become increasingly difficult to find. As Dr. Williams spoke, Isaac tried to focus on the words, but the fear kept creeping in. What if this was all for nothing? What if they ran out of time before they even had a chance to try? The doctor's voice continued, but it faded in and out, until only one thought remained in Isaac's mind: what if I can't save her? As Dr. Williams finished his explanation, Isaac felt a strange sense of paralysis. The decision was now in his hands, and it felt like everything was riding on this moment. He looked at Harper, who was watching the doctor intently, her little fingers tracing the seams of her rabbit's ears. Despite everything she had been through, there was a light in her eyes, a spark of life that Isaac couldn't bear to let go of. "Is there any chance at all?" Isaac's voice broke through the silence. Dr. Williams leaned forward, his eyes meeting Isaac's with a seriousness that conveyed both understanding and resolve. "I won't lie to you, Mr. Grant. The prognosis is grave. But this is a treatment that could give Harper more time, a chance to grow, to be a child again. There is hope, and that's something we can't ignore." Isaac felt a lump form in his throat, but he nodded, his mind made up. He would do whatever it took to give Harper that chance. She deserved more than this life of endless treatments and hospital rooms. She deserved to laugh again, to dance again, to have the childhood she was meant to have. But as he turned to Harper, to share the news with her, he caught sight of something unexpected, something that felt out of place in a hospital room. Through the window of the office door, he could see a shadow moving past. At first, he thought it was just his imagination, a trick of the light. But then the shadow stopped, and Isaac's blood ran cold. There, standing just outside the door, was a figure he immediately recognized, the flight attendant from their earlier journey. His heart sank. The same woman who had humiliated Harper on the plane, the one who had made their lives so much harder than it needed to be, was now standing at the threshold, watching them. Isaac felt his anger rise, burning hot and fierce, like a flame that had been smoldering for far too long. His instincts screamed at him to confront her, to demand answers, but he couldn't let his emotions take over now, not when Harper needed him to stay calm. The flight attendant hesitated for a moment, then knocked on the door. Dr. Williams looked up, confused, before rising to open it. Isaac stood, ready to confront the woman who had made his daughter's life even more difficult, but as soon as the door opened, the attendant's face softened in a way Isaac hadn't expected. "I'm terribly sorry to intrude," the flight attendant said, her voice almost timid. "I didn't mean to cause any trouble earlier, and I know I shouldn't be here. But I wanted to apologize to Harper." Isaac's jaw tightened. He had every right to be angry, but for a moment, his emotions tangled. Harper was his priority, and her pain was still raw. He wasn't sure what was happening, but the woman's apology didn't feel sincere, it felt like something else, something desperate. Harper, to Isaac's surprise, looked up at the woman, her big eyes meeting the flight attendant's with an expression that was neither angry nor sad, but curious. "Why did you say that stuff to me on the plane?" she asked, her voice soft but clear. Isaac felt his stomach tighten at the question. It was the kind of question only a child could ask, completely devoid of any fear or judgment. The flight attendant took a deep breath, her shoulders sagging slightly. "I don't know what came over me," she admitted. "I was having a bad day. And when I saw you and your father in first class, I judged you. I thought you didn't belong there, and I was wrong. I let my assumptions take over, and I hurt you." Harper's gaze didn't waver. "People make mistakes," she said simply, as if she had learned something profound in the short span of her life. The words hit Isaac like a punch to the chest. He had expected anger, resentment, something to make him feel justified in his fury. But instead, Harper's compassion washed over the situation in a way that neither he nor the flight attendant had anticipated. The attendant's eyes began to water, and she wiped at them quickly. "I don't expect forgiveness. But I want you to know that I'm truly sorry. For everything." Isaac watched the woman, her genuine remorse hanging in the air. The anger inside him began to dissolve, replaced by something that felt even more powerful, a realization that perhaps, just perhaps, this moment was about something more than him or Harper. "Thank you," Isaac said quietly, surprising even himself with the calmness of his voice. "I'm glad you came. But you've got a long road ahead of you if you want to make this right." The flight attendant nodded, tears in her eyes. "I know. And I'll do whatever it takes." For a moment, there was silence in the room, just the weight of the unspoken understanding between them. As the flight attendant turned to leave, Isaac realized that perhaps the world was not as cold as he had once thought. There was room for change, even in the most unlikely places. Maybe, just maybe, people could grow. And just like that, the long road ahead didn't seem quite so daunting.